Welcome to How to Live Slow, the podcast where we discuss slow living for the modern woman and help you design an intentionally slower family life. I'm Rachelle Glendon, your personal slow living coach and host of this podcast. I know all about busy, but I love living slow. Enjoy the show. Well, hello and welcome to another episode of the podcast. Today I have a very special guest. Sarah Alex Carter is the author of a book called Upward, The Power of Looking Up. And this little idea is a magic idea, and this conversation is a magic conversation. Sarah shares with us her story from going through a physical, emotional, and mental breakdown to getting to a stage where she asked, what do I really want to do? And how can I create a new life and live differently? And how that became this beautiful book that she's written. And in the book, well, in this episode, we talk about some really deep topics, but in a really light way. Like, for example, we'll talk about the little bird called a swift and what a swift and street lamps and insects have to do with each other and what they can teach us about looking up and seeing the connection of seemingly not related things and how everything is connected. And that is the beauty of Sarah and her amazing book. She really is a storyteller, and she has brought together so many different metaphors and ways of thinking about upward living or looking up and out into the wider world and how it can really help you. And this episode for me is just another example of how we all have a contribution to make to the world. And it really is such a pleasure to speak to such interesting and compassionate and amazing people such as Sarah. So I hope you enjoy the episode, and I will speak with you next week. So I'm really excited to chat with Sarah today. I've got Sarah Alex Carter, who wrote the amazing book Upward, The Power of Looking Up. Hi, Sarah. How are you going?
Hi there, Rachelle. Hi, I'm really good. Thank you. How are you?
Yeah, I'm so good. I'm really, so excited about what we're going to talk about today. But tell us about you and how you came to write this book. So I think that's a really great place to start.
Yeah, definitely. My goodness, it's been a real journey. So I think the best way to sort of describe it is that writing has always been a part of my life, but at times it was hidden. So it's been a really interesting process of revealing that over the last few years. So I'll go back to sort of 2017. I had a breakdown, and it was kind of an emotional, mental and physical breakdown where my body decided to say to me, look, you need to stop. You need to actually stop and look at what you're doing, how you're living. And as a result of that, I had a period of time where I was able to recover, but not only that, look at my life and also relearn some of the ways that I was living and my behavior and the choices that I'd made. So that was 2017. And then in 2018, I was kind of at a crossroads because I'd gone through a process of recovering and feeling better and getting well. And I was left with this thought of, well, what do I do now? Who am I? Who am I if I'm not this kind of manic, career-driven, climb the ladder academic, which is what I was. And I thought, right, well, where do I go from here? And so I came to this crossroads, and it was really interesting because I met with a coach and I had lots of questions. But one of the things that she asked me was what was my values and what were the things that brought me joy. And I interestingly said gardening, and I don't mention this in the book, but I mentioned gardening and I thought, why gardening? And then I realized that gardening was because I did it without there to be any need of an outcome. I did it as a process. I did it because I loved the process of growing things and seeing things change and being a part of nature. It was just being in that moment with that activity. And then that led my thought process to, well, what else in my life do I do that allows me to do that? And it was writing. And I was just hit with this light bulb moment of, I can write, and it doesn't have to necessarily be for an outcome, but it is simply because of the process, the love, the joy, the kind of the intimacy of getting my thoughts onto paper. And that just spiraled a whole catalyst of me starting to write for magazines, and I started my own blog. And as a part of that, I was researching, I was reading, and I read a book called Joyful by Ingrid Fettel-Lee. And in that book, there's a chapter on lightness. And it just struck me. I was like, oh my goodness, imagine if we all decided to be lighter. What would that look like? What if we all started to look up? And she had this thing about hot air balloons and also about tree houses, which I go on to write about in my book. But it just started this germ of an idea, this kind of seed was planted, going back to the gardening.
Yeah.
And it just developed into this amazing process and journey and discovery for me. So writing the book was very much, it came out of years of having hidden this love of writing, but then rediscovering it. And then discovering that what was bringing me joy was not only writing, but telling stories. And it was also part of me relearning who I was.
Amazing. Oh, yeah. I love how we just led in directions, aren't we? Sounds like it was just meant to happen that way.
Yeah, definitely. And I think that crossroads that I was at was very much, there was a question, what should I do? And again, I haven't mentioned this in the book, so it's great to talk to you about this because it's kind of bringing out things that are part of my process as a writer. But that question of what should I do? And the answer was either what do I really feel in me to do, or what has been shown to me by society, by my upbringing, by my career path from school through into my career, of what I should or what I ought or what's expected of me.
Yeah. We'll definitely talk a little bit more about that because, this whole idea of what you should do versus how you feel. What do you feel like doing? I think that's so stamped out of us, isn't it?
Oh, absolutely. And I think that point was, there was almost like this guilt of feeling, well, if I didn't continue on the academic path, which was publishing papers, peer research, conferences, that sort of area of academic research, if I didn't go down that route, then I would almost feel guilty for putting to one side all those years of training and time and effort and energy. And then I stopped to think, well, I love gardening. And gardening isn't because I'm told to do it. And it isn't because I'm expected to do it. It's simply a love of doing it. And then that's where the writing spark came from. It was like, oh my goodness, I don't even have to. And it was interesting because the coach said to me at the time, she said, do you think you've got a book in you? And at that point, I was like, oh my goodness, me, an author? No, that's not. I knew I wanted to write, but I didn't see it ending in a book.
Funny, because you're already doing writing, weren't you?
Absolutely. Like writing has been there. It was, again, I always think of writing like the best friend next door. The boy next door, he's your best friend and he's been your best friend all these years. And it takes you about, 10, 15 years to realize he was the love of your life.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. Only you had to realize. But I guess your writing becomes so much more rich because you've had these other experiences. There's no way you could have written the book as it is now, which it's an incredible book, if you hadn't have had those experiences with the other bad boyfriends.
Absolutely. And thank you for that, because it's that constant that's there through your life.
Yeah.
And I realized that it's a golden thread that has run through my whole life. and it's just stayed with me. And I don't know, I don't like the pressure that's put on people to say, oh, you've got to follow the one thing that you're meant to do, because I think that can inhibit you from a very young age to feel like, oh, I've got to find that one thing.
Yeah.
And maybe if I'd have felt like that, I would have not had all the experiences. I wouldn't have, been the academic and taught for 20 years and met the people that I met and gone through the processes of life that I have.
Yeah.
If I'd have thought, oh, I've got to do that one thing. I see writing far more as an expression of lots of amazing things that have happened to me or have happened to other people that I'm able to draw on.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, I love a metaphor, so I'm loving this. But I do want to talk a bit more about the book, because it's a unique take. I really love it. It's called Upward. What does it mean to you to look up? Like, what was it about this idea that captured you to decide to write about it rather than any other idea that you've come across? Like, what was it about this that made it special for you?
Yeah. Like I mentioned, I read the book Joyful, and that sparked the idea. But what really captured me was the idea of we can be so insular, we can look inward and we can look downward. And when I started to think about this idea, I had come from a place of feeling very down. I had a period of 10 years, I would say, where I had struggled with my mental health. I had been chronically anxious and stressed and hadn't addressed that because I had started to look inward. I had started to look at myself. I'd started to blame myself. I had started to say the things that your inner critic says to you of, well, why aren't you coping? You should be able to cope. You should be able to. And you should. And one day when I was particularly unwell, I can remember I was bent over like an old woman. I was literally, my whole physical body was downward looking, inward looking. And I can remember opening my chest, sitting back, looking up physically with my head, and just realizing actually there is a world beyond what I'm experiencing.
Yeah.
And so when I read that book, Joyful, and this idea of lightness and looking further than yourself, upward for me is about choice. Looking up is a decision that we make. It's a choice that we make. It's a choice to say, I am looking beyond who I am right now to outside the world, the people, nature, life that I am a part of, if I only decide and choose to raise my eyes, to lift my head, to look around me and see, I'm a part of this. I'm not an insular individual on my own struggling, because that's what I felt like. But that, stepping, it very much became this idea of stepping beyond yourself and your circumstances. And that's not negating your circumstances. I didn't become any less depressed and anxious and worried about my health at that point.
Yeah.
But it became this cascade of looking, noticing, seeing, and reaching beyond what I was experiencing.
Yeah. Like, I can see like almost so much in that metaphor, isn't there? Like, I can think when you're looking, you're staring at a phone or you're staring at a screen and you've got the blinkers on, you can't really see. And like the algorithms of everything that we touch online gears us to see more of what we already believe. So then saying we've become insular, it's like also that. It keeps us, it's hard to then see. So then we start to believe even more, and we think that there's so many people that believe the same things as us because that's what we're seeing replicated online. But it's not necessarily the case either. But we forget that we actually are part of a community that's up out there in the world.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I felt very strongly starting out, and I wrote about it in my book proposal and in the introduction about this idea of the downward spiral. You look down, you look at your phone, you become absorbed in that screen, which then might have messages which aren't particularly uplifting. So then your mental and your knowledge is affected by that, and you become downward in your thinking, which then affects your feelings, which then affect your actions. And before you know it, we're all walking around, like you say, with blinkers on, thinking, well, this is the only way I can look at things. This is the only way I can see things. And it's almost like I went through this process of relearning who I was. And it was like scales fell from my eyes. It was like, and yeah, I talk obviously about various kind of a theme of Hebrew language, which interestingly came out as I wrote the book, but also there's about faith and different religions that come through. And I'm not saying I had a Damascus Road kind of St. Paul on the way to Damascus where he had this massive revelation. I'm not saying that happened, but I am saying I felt like, wow, why haven't I seen this before? Why haven't I noticed this before? Because it was almost like as though I'd been kept in a state of looking down and inward. And I think with the book, that's why it became so broad, was because it wasn't just about my mental attitude. It was about the physical things I could do to change the way I sat, my posture, and the way that I lifted my head, the way that I stood. That physical element not only changes you in space as a person within your environment, but also your mental outlook. It has that knock-on effect.
Yeah, I love that. That is part of the concept of the whole book, particularly the first half, where you talk so much about all the different ways that looking up, there's so many different phrases, metaphors, like so many examples. Like even I think you were saying about just the amount of variety of different people that you spoke to. You spoke to someone who teaches stand-up paddleboarding yoga. You spoke to someone who is someone in a choir talking about when everybody sings and they're like first learning to sing and they're looking at the book and it doesn't sound good. And then when everyone knows the song and they're all singing in harmony with their voices projected up and out, their heads raised, and that just comes together. And so many little ways that that metaphor kind of comes through in our experience of the world. It's such a unique and interesting, but such a simple concept. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And you know what? As I spoke to people, I started to realize you don't need any special equipment. You don't need to buy anything. You don't need to have any kit. You don't need to go on a course. You don't need to, learn any kind of like super intelligent information that you've kind of got to spend years studying. It's something so simple that we've been given. But then as you say, I started to learn about how the body changes when our eyes look up or when our chin is lifted, and then when our diaphragm is raised so we can sing out, or when you look at someone else who has done something kind, and that creates a cascade then of kindness in you. And I was just like, wow, this is like almost like this network from a very simple motion. And like I say, I believe it's a choice that we think, actually, I can do this. I actually can start to see differently.
Yeah. So many directions that I want to talk about, and I've got so many questions that I'm like, please don't forget any of them. So I'll try to keep it a little bit methodical. So
that's fine. Absolutely.
Talking about, and because everything you're saying is giving me ideas. Oh, what about this and what about that I wanted to mention? But let's talk about that story about the birds. What were the birds? Were they swallows?
Swifts.
Oh, swifts. Sorry, swifts. Yeah. So I imagine they're a bit like a swallow or something like that. I don't know what a swift is. I guess they're not in Australia. Maybe they are, I don't know. But anyway, beside the point. And about how you just noticed one day when you were just out looking up, going, I remember these birds from my childhood and there just doesn't seem to be as many. And then you went on a bit of a cycle, like a hunt of like, why aren't there as many birds? And do you want to tell the story about how that came about?
Absolutely. It was, So where I live in South Wales. So I live in the Welsh Valleys in South Wales in the UK. And some of the areas where I live it's very mountainous, and sort of the hills around the back of our house, which attract a lot of wildlife, which is wonderful. And one of the birds that visits us each summer is the swift. And yes, you're right. So the swift is part of the swallow and house martin family.
Right.
So
okay.
I'm not an expert, but I have a fascination with them and a curiosity about them because, yeah, like you say, about in my childhood, seeing them, hearing them, because they've got a very audible screech, and just filling the summer skies, and just this beautiful kind of arrival of these birds each year is kind of the herald and the start of summer. And it's really exciting because now I'm sort of waiting. I'm there in May and I'm thinking, right, they're going to come soon. They're going to be here.
Yeah.
So I thought, yeah, I understood that.
So, sorry, are they migrating? They come from somewhere, do they? Yeah, okay.
Yeah, so swallows in particular, I understood about swallows that they came from Africa.
Yeah.
So with swifts, I looked into it, and in fact, swifts are even more, they are much more of an endurance bird, even more so than swallows. So they travel thousands of miles from Africa, which is where they overwinter. And then they travel back up through Europe and end up back with us in the UK. And they return to the same nest. They have the same breeding partners. They raise their chicks, and you see them teaching their chicks to kind of fly and catch and gather and feed during the summer here. And then around about the middle of August, when the weather starts to tail off, they disappear and they're gone. And it's a real moment of thinking, oh my gosh, they've started their journey again. So they're going back through Europe. They head back down into the Sahara for the winter. But I noticed that there weren't as many. And I noticed that these birds were where they would have been sort of housing and barns and places that they would have naturally nested. Those had disappeared. And then I was thinking, yeah, but it's got to be more than that, because I see little nests here and there all around the housing estates. They find somewhere to live. So what is causing this? And it is insect population. It's through pesticides and the changes that are happening, our man-made changes in terms of what we're doing to the planet that's affecting our insect population. And as a result of that, their food is being depleted. So therefore, they're not getting the stores and the nourishment and the resources that they need to survive that length of journey, because it's huge. They sleep, eat, and mate on the wing. They don't rest, and they continue their journey, and they need the fuel. And in order to do that, they need the insects, and they're not there. And I thought about swifts, and I was like, oh my goodness, what can we do? I can't create more insects. Yes, I can plant things in my garden that can make a difference. But actually what's happening is the lighting that is distributed, our electric lighting, our lamps, our lights, our
street lights and things,
street lights, the lighting that runs through our cities, our neighborhoods, that in fact is changing and affecting the insect population. It's confusing them. It's changing their mating and reproduction patterns, which is causing them to diminish. And so if we really go back to the source, which is the insects, how we affect them and how we change them starts to affect everything else. And so if we look at what's changing and affecting them, if we simply altered light bulbs in our street lamps, if we changed from a super bright, so Kelvin scale, without going too technical, is the lighting that's used to determine how light a bulb in a street lamp is. If we reduce that down so it became more natural and a lower scale on the Kelvin scale, that would cause a change and a knock-on effect in the insect population, which would then restore swifts.
Isn't that crazy? And I'm sure that's just one example of that cycle of, we have too bright lighting. And I think you even said in the book, like, it's just a simple change from it's like a more orangey coloured light to those compared to those bright white lights. So then it's basically not the insects are confusing that with moon and the changing seasons because things are bright. They think it's summer all the time because the lights and all of this stuff. So they're not breeding the way, and then there's not enough for them to. And how many other birds and other kind of examples? I mean, I know.
Goodness, that's just one population, and swifts are now they're recognised on the critical list for endangered species.
Are they?
And you think, my goodness, and this came about because I spoke to a gentleman called Alan Trow, who is a part of Dark Sky Wales, and they run dark sky safaris. And as a result of speaking to him, what was amazing about the book is I would have an idea, I would follow that almost as this little trail of breadcrumbs, which would then lead me to speaking to someone. And Alan and the work that they do in Dark Sky Wales is very much about educating people, change your lighting, change your lamping, the Kelvin scale, bringing in the warmer tones of that colour scale, shifting the way you use electricity. All of those little changes that we can do has that effect that's rippling out into the wider world.
Yeah, amazing. I'd never really thought of street lighting. So that's a really tangible thing that we can all do, is to just ask our councils, can we please change the colour of the light bulb that you're using in street lighting? And I think you even said a lot of people think that the brighter lights is for the safety, so that, it's a bit safer when you're walking home at night or whatever. But actually, the lower lighting there's been some evidence to suggest that actually reduces crime, because the contrast between the lit up place and the darker places is less. So, I mean, it sounds so simple, but criminals can't hide in the dark because it's not so much contrast in the lighting.
That's right. And, because the shadow created by a harsh light is far darker. So it's really interesting.
Actually would be, you could see it more beyond the light that you're in. Yeah.
Exactly. And I think that the thing that struck me when I spoke with Alan was how here in Wales, we sometimes during the winter months, we leave in the dark, we come home in the dark. So we are being illuminated constantly by artificial light. And so, we come out of our houses, which are lit. We get into our cars, which are then lit. We get into our office, which is lit. And so it's sort of this perpetuating cycle that we don't fully embrace darkness. We've become, again, so comforted by these artificial kind of, it's almost like bubble wrapping ourselves we mustn't feel any discomfort. So we must therefore make sure everything is lit, everything is bright, we can see, we know. Whereas in fact, we were designed as humans and as nature to live some of our day in darkness.
Yeah, and I actually think if I connect that to, my seasons of slow, that's, the light helps us to, continue to work at the same pace, which we're not meant to do. We are meant to have periods of fallow and periods of work, and we're seasonal in nature. We are nature. So, yeah, I think it's really interesting. And as I've witnessed my kids and noticed that, in winter they sleep more naturally, and in summer they get up earlier because it's lighter earlier, and they go, and they've got, it's just different, isn't it? And I've noticed that when I allow myself to sleep to my tiredness levels, and I've got the lights off at nighttime, I tend to sleep different. I sleep more in winter, and that's completely okay.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's it's the whole circadian rhythm, isn't it?
Yeah,
and it's that again, this is about looking up. It's thinking, actually, how am I connected to what's happening outside? Because our body, the chemical composition in our body changes as we go through the day, whereas our serotonin is high in the morning to enable us to wake up, which then shifts through the day into the changes hormonally to increase our sleep levels and to allow us to sleep properly. And, they talk about, in terms of sleep hygiene, about having a darker room and blocking out street lights because, and we've got one right outside our window, and it's we need those blackout curtains to enable us to properly let those hormonal levels and the chemical levels in our bodies to shift and change as they would naturally.
Yeah, so fascinating, so interesting. One of the other things that you talk about in the book, which because I'm going on our trip, I'm just so like loving, and it's all about the tree houses and there's this. Tell us about the tree houses, because that's interesting, and I really love that there was a little in the guest book that this treehouse owner, I'll let you tell it, wrote. One little kid wrote in his book, "Thank you," her or she wrote in the book, "Thank you for giving me my family back." And I thought, gee, that's really special. So tell us about the treehouse story.
Yeah. So this is, it's interesting because this is connected to what we were talking about, because the darkness that we experienced in the treehouse was really interesting. So I have to say credit to Ingrid Fettley with her book Joyful. She actually visited tree houses, and I just thought, wow, wouldn't that be exciting? So I started to research, and I was like, oh my goodness, let's have a look where there are tree houses in the UK. And it just so happened that there's a company called Living Room Wales. So in the mid part of Wales, in a place called Machynlleth, which is sort of halfway between the south and the north before you get to Snowdonia in the north. It's a very kind of wild area. It's known for its natural beauty. And there's a gentleman there who created tree houses from a forest that was going to be taken down. And so they, as part of their way of making a change, making a difference, decided to lease this forest for 20 years and build sustainable homes for people to come and stay. So there are these tree houses, and they are one of the only tree houses in the UK that are actually engineered and structured in the tree. So there are no supports from the ground. It's literally within the tree. So it's quite exciting, because you think, how on earth is this going to work for a family of 4 to stay in a tree? It's very much Swiss Family Robinson, it's kind of conjures up those ideas. So I had the pleasure of interviewing Mark, and he talked me through the design and the structure and why they'd done it as a project to reconnect people with nature. And so we decided, right, we're going to book, and they get booked up so quickly. But there was a cancellation, and we were like, right, we're going to jump on that. And we decided to go. So that was in the April, and it was Easter, and it was forecast snow. So it was like, right, okay, how are we going to do this? This is in a treehouse. We're in the middle of nowhere and in this forest. And do you know what? We arrived, and we were led through this canopy of trees to our treehouse, which was idyllic, and it had this stream running under it. And you just felt the biggest sigh of relief as you arrived, and just wherever you looked was nature. So it was designed, it was an incredible structure. It was designed to look like the head of an owl. So it had huge round windows at the front.
Wow.
And
very high up?
Yeah, completely. Yeah, totally high up. I would say good, oh gosh, I might have said it in the book, but I can't remember. But it was a good 20 to 30 foot up. Yeah, properly high up. And, there was a toilet, and there was amenities. There was, it wasn't kind of like survival. It was very comfortable. Everything was wooden. Everything was local wood. So all sourced from the local area. There was a wood burning stove in there, comfortable seats, comfortable bedding.
Wow.
But it was just the sense of you were up, and you were in a different vista and a different point of view to what you would normally be. So usually we're on the ground looking up into the tree canopy, whereas actually living in the tree canopy and seeing the birds, seeing the kind of different viewpoint of the landscape. And just the sight, the sound, the senses were just kind of taken over by... It was a totally different perspective and way of living. We were there for 3 days, 2 nights.
Amazing.
And Mark told me about the story of these families who will come, and they'll come with their kind of moody teenagers who are disappointed that they don't have Wi-Fi and they can't use the tablets and they can't switch on and be as plugged in as they would usually. And by the time they leave, they're building dams and little, sort of creations on the stream, and they're swinging in the tree swing, and they're foraging and messing about in the the little brooks and the various areas that are around, and they leave these different people.
Yeah, I can
And
imagine.
it's that story of in the guest book of thank you for giving me my family back. This disconnected family who didn't sleep very well, didn't eat together, didn't work or play or really connect with each other because they had separate bedrooms. And so when they arrived home from work, they would go into their separate compartments of the house. That might be the kitchen or the living room or the bedrooms. But because the tree house is open plan, it brought them together.
Yeah.
And because when you're there, you're immersed, you are in it together. There's this wonderful sense of you rely on each other. You have to chop the wood to fire the stove, to heat the water. You have to work as a team effectively. That was one of the things my son loved doing. He was only, gosh, how old would he have been at the time? He would have been maybe 5 or 6, and his role was to chop the wood. And he loved that, he absolutely was his, and the fact that he knew that was making a difference to what we were experiencing, because it enabled us to cook, it enabled us to wash, it enabled us to clean the dishes afterwards.
That's so cool.
It became this idea of, it really brought home to me this cycle of us being connected to each other, connected to nature again. And we experienced very dark skies and very dark because there was no lighting, there was no electricity.
Yeah.
So it was pitch black, and that was really interesting. So
right.
If you get to go and stay in a tree house, I would definitely recommend it. But I think I end that story. It was on the last day, and I was on the balcony looking down, which is interesting. I was looking down on my family, and my son was doing something, but my daughter was swinging on the tree swing, which was just a rope with a branch attached to it. And I just thought, children need this. This is what they need. They need that element of nature in their lives that just allows them to be children.
Yeah. There's a really great Instagram page. She's got a podcast and all things. It's called 1,000 Hours Outside.
Oh, wow.
I love it. And the idea is that I think she started with a little downloadable, and there's 1,000 squares on it. And over the year, you're supposed to colour in every hour that you've spent outside. And the idea is that 1,000 hours is about 3 hours a day outside for kids. And she has so much to say about that exact topic. And one of her recent ones was about how middle childhood is lost, because we have these little kids and we go, we know before school, they're outside at the park and whatnot, sometimes. And then you've got teenagers, but then that middle area where they're potentially losing that connection to play, and they're it's lost a little bit. I think that's beautiful.
Definitely. And I think that isn't there a book which is about 1,000 hours, and I'm not sure, let me have a little look on here. There's a book, You Become What You Practice, which is by Phyllis Lane. I'm just looking here. And what's interesting is this 1,000 hours concept is very much around achieving. When you said 1,000 hours, straight away, I thought to myself, I've heard of that before. But I've heard of it in terms of, I think it's if you practice for a certain amount of time each day, you can achieve your goal. But it's very motivated by success, achievement, doing, being, being that person who is the top player in their field, or the top musician in their field, or the top artist, or the top person in their field. And what a wonderful kind of, let's flip that on its head and think, actually, instead, why don't we spend that 1,000 hours getting back to what we were designed for, which isn't about competing against each other, and isn't about pressurizing our kids to be something maybe that they're not, and about placing them back in that environment of actually, imagine 1,000 hours of play. What would that look like? That would be incredible, wouldn't it? Outdoors as well. Outdoors as well.
I know, exactly. Out and getting that particularly if it's morning or afternoon, getting that last light or the first light to fully wake up and to set the circadian rhythm and all of that good stuff. And I think it was on her podcast, actually, as a side note, I think that I heard them saying about how there's no evidence to suggest that you need to start young if you want to be if you want to be an elite athlete. You can start in your teenage years. You don't have to be playing soccer from the age of 5, or football, as you would call it. Or netball or any sport. Yeah. You don't have to be doing it from the age of 5 to be an elite athlete in that field.
No.
As an adult, you can start it any time, really, and develop the skill. It's got to be more about the desire, which I think is also fascinating, because I think we do push our kids a little bit sometimes into these things because we don't want them to miss out, but actually it's not always
not always beneficial. But I think absolutely. I think, again, coming back to thinking about choice and thinking about seeing the world differently, that we don't have to follow, we don't have to continue or perpetuate the ideas that we're told at the school gate, or that we hear about at the coffee morning or on the news, or by the water cooler. It doesn't have to be, somebody's one idea doesn't have to be perpetuated all the way through someone's life. It can be, let's stop and think, what if I wanted to be an athlete when I'm 30 and I started when I was 20?
Yeah.
Isn't that okay? That's maybe a different way of looking at things.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that's exactly, like, instead of going so focused, like you said, like, it's that broad approach of like many experiences, and then you decide over time. And I think that's a really nice way to end, because I was going to say, like, at the end of the book, like, I thought it really dawned on me that the book is not just about looking beyond ourselves into the wider world. Like that is one big theme of the book, but it's like stopping trying to heal and figuring out what we can do as part of the whole to fix the system that's actually broken as well. So it's, like, there's small things that we can do and big things we can do. And we can, like, sort of almost flip it. We're not victims. We can actually influence things too.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And I think that's really powerful.
Yeah, definitely. At the end of the book, which is about belonging, and I think, it certainly does come full circle, because, going back to the story of the Swifts, which was very much about how we impact on nature and nature impacts on us. But I interviewed at the end of the book Dr. Julian Abel for the section on togetherness, and he talks about all our relations, and he talks about how we are all connected, and how it's sort of that extension of ourselves is other people and is nature.
Yeah.
But one thing I said to Julian is, so Julian, in the book, you'll see that he's a doctor. He was a palliative care doctor.
Yeah.
And he worked in the market town of Frome in Somerset in the UK. And they transformed the way they lived in that market town by connecting people to each other. And there's a great book called Compassionate Communities, the town that beat loneliness. So how we came together as a community to help each other, reducing hospital admissions, improving people's well-being. And when I spoke to Julian, there's a really interesting thing here where it says, he relates this to his own experience as a palliative care doctor and how compassion comes in many forms. But it's the simplest that we sometimes overlook. The small act of making a cup of tea for someone, making space for kindness. When you create a space for kindness, it absolutely is transformative. It's simply being kind. You don't have to be a saint. And sometimes when we look at the world's problems and we look at the systems that are broken, we feel, oh my gosh, well, what can I do? Yeah. Because I'm like one person, and how on earth am I going to, I'm really passionate about our education system, and the way that it is failing our children. And we look at the climate crisis and we think, oh my gosh, how am I going to make that change? And I asked Julian that. I said, it feels insurmountable. Sometimes it feels overwhelming. And he's emphatic when he says, I think you do everything you can. I think it has to come from the ground up. If we choose to behave differently as a society on a very mundane level, I think we've got a unique opportunity to dramatically change, and we can create a movement related to living better. And he goes on to say, we have to use whatever works and make the message understandable and important. What's the other option? Giving up?
Yeah.
And he said, no, it's not about thinking, what's the other option? Not doing anything at all.
Yeah.
And I felt like that with my book. It's been self-published. It's been a journey. It's been a telling of stories, of my story, but very much it's been about other people and their stories.
Yeah.
And I think if that can help one person, if that can shift someone into a new way of thinking, to see how their small choices can affect big change, then that's a privilege for me. That's, wow,
Yeah, I think you most definitely have achieved that. I personally love the book. It's been so enlightening. Yeah, I think what you're saying there really, it's just landed with me. Like, it's like if you let yourself keep looking down and thinking only about, letting yourself be sad, or, thinking that there's nothing you can do, and doing the opposite of what you say in the book, like being so insular, and then you'll never develop the worth or the belief that what you can do matters. So it's like when you see that you are an important part of the society that you're in, and you take action to do that, you fix some part of the world that's broken. And by doing that, that's how you fix yourself. You can't fix yourself without being part of something, in a way. Not that we're all broken, but do you know what I mean? No. Like, it's like if you want that inner healing and that sense of fulfillment, which is actually what I think
it starts with you. It starts with me. Yeah. It's my responsibility, because my world is my children, is my family, is my network.
Yeah.
But I'm one person. And if everyone started to think, if I change me, I change them. Not in the sense of change people, but it has that ripple effect.
You influence things.
I change, it's those influences, it's those decisions, it's I'm choosing to do this differently.
Yeah.
It gives permission to other people as well to say, oh, actually, maybe I could do it differently too.
Yeah. Yeah.
And when we look up and look out at each other, we start to see it's very much that, yes, you can. Yes, you can. Yeah. And that's okay. And it's okay to do it differently.
Yeah, beautiful. Absolutely. Thank you so much for today. This has been an incredible conversation.
I've loved it. And I could just, oh my goodness, I could just go on. So thank you for keeping me on track with my, my stories and the content of the book, because it's just been wonderful to chat with you. And, hopefully we'll continue doing that as, time goes on. But for today, thank you so much. It's been an absolute pleasure to meet with you.
Yeah, same. Thank you so much. All right. So actually, have you got a website? Like, you've got Instagram, so I'll leave that in the show notes, and we'll leave a link to the book. Have you got a website that people want to share where we can find you?
So that's sarahalexcarter.com.
Yes.
So if you go to the website, that will have details of the book. It will also have the link for the book. Yeah. And then it has all kind of content and different things that you can look at that are related to the book, but also to the work that I do as well.
Yeah, amazing. All right, I'll leave all of that info in the show notes, but just so people can hear it if they're driving.
Fab. Amazing.
Thank you. That's it for another episode. Thank you so much for joining me today. If you'd like to connect further, the show notes from today's episode, including all the social links and free resources, are over on my website, howtoliveslow.com/podcast. Have a beautiful week ahead, and I'll speak with you again soon.